Recently I recorded a video covering a simple and aggressive opening for black against the white's queen's pawn move pawn to d4, and you guys sent me a ton of positive comments about that, but you also asked me how to counter if your opponent uses the London system and some other tricky gambits, and that's exactly what we're going to be covering today. But first of all, in case you missed the first video, real quick, what am I even talking about? Now, we're talking about the Dutch defense, and although it's called a defense, in fact we're going to attack. Now, if your opponent plays most common casual moves of the Queen's Gambit, we have this very interesting setup when we fianchetto the queenside bishop, and after that we are ready to launch this strong kingside attack. And it's a very simple and effective setup. Now, it's all good and you can win a ton of games playing this, but sometimes you're going to encounter the London system. When your opponent goes for the London system with bishop to f4, indeed playing that system does not quite work. Usually we know that they are going to play c3 and pawn to e3, and therefore this e6 and bishop b4 thing is not going to work. Now, of course, you could have developed your bishop to e7, but nevertheless it's not the best way. Now, the downside of the London system is that we know exactly what they're going to do, and we're going to hit them where it hurts. Therefore, instead of going for our trivial system, we're going to switch it to the so-called Leningrad variation. After knight f6, pawn e3, you're going pawn to d6. Now, that setup is usually the most annoying for the London system players. They really wish your pawn to stand on d5, such as in the Queen's Gambit, where this bishop is going to be active, they control this central square e5, and life's good for white. But when you play your pawn to d6, this bishop is dull. It is facing the wall. Moreover, in the future, we are going to prepare the central break pawn e5, and this bishop will only be helpful for us in development of our attack. It will cost white extra temples to retreat. Therefore, we go for pawn to d6. After knight to f3, we need to finalize the development of our kingside. Since our bishop is obstructed along this diagonal, we develop it by fianchettoing. We go pawn g6, they do their London stuff. Then pawn to c3, we castle, they play knight to d2, we go knight to c6, developing a knight, and our main plan is still just to play pawn e5. By the way, although this particular system may be new for you, it is actually almost the same as the King's Indian. Because if you think about this, if this pawn were on f7, we're having the King's Indian defense. Moreover, in the King's Indian, usually later in the middle game, black still tries to play pawn f5 and pawn e5 anyways, therefore we're actually going to transition to that thing. Now, here, white will usually castle or do anything else. We don't really care. They can play any other moves. We're going to execute our plan. After they castle, we wish to play the move pawn e5, but we can't right now because they've got 3 attackers versus we've got 2 supporters. Therefore, we need 1 more. And you've got this move queen e8. A little bit of an unusual move, but the purpose is just to play pawn e5. And they can't really stop it. They usually play rook to e1, that's the most common move, which doesn't make any sense really. First off, if they wanted to play e4, and that's the only meaningful explanation of the move rook e1, they kind of tried to play it straight away, but that would be a blunder, and actually many of them fall for it. They do play pawn e4, trying to attack in the center before you had a chance to do that, but in fact, after this exchange on e4, they're blundering the fact that this opens up your rook, and you simply grab this bishop on f4. In reality, they usually play that pointless move rook to e1, and then you happily break open the center with pawn to e5. And as soon as you play that move, usually it means that you're taking over and you're going to grab quite noticeable advantage. Now, they must take right here on e5. If not, you're attacking this bishop, and on the next move, you're going to play e4 and just win one of these 2 pieces. Now, why was it important for white to trade off the d-pawns? Because now they don't have this in-between check, because you would play pawn d5, and you're still hitting these 2 pieces, and you're going to win one of them. Therefore, it is better for white to trade these pawns first, and after that they usually go bishop g5, you still play pawn e4, gaining space, and in some variations it could even win a piece thanks to this double attack. In the current position, white can get away with this in-between check, but it doesn't change the situation overall because you're still having a great position. You now need to get out of this check, therefore we move. Now they need to move this knight away, they go knight to d4, and here we do not take it. We have this really phenomenal square e5 for our knight. It is centralized, it puts pressure to this bishop, it potentially eyes this juicy square e3 for our knight, and life is just good. As soon as you got to this position, usually you begin to dominate, and white is going down from here. For example, right now they are usually feeling uncomfortable because of this attack. They try to keep the bishop on this open diagonal, but that is actually wrong because that allows you to jump with your knight forward to d3, the square which is no longer guarded by the bishop, and from there this octopus knight is going to destroy them. You can also play pawn c5, kicking away the only good piece that they have really in the position. After that, the knight has to go back, and now you can land your knight to d3. This octopus knight is controlling all the squares in his position, attacking everything all around, and now this is just waiting for you. You could grab this pawn on b2, probably the strongest move. You could also pressure that bishop on b3 with something like b5 and c4, just trying to capture it or just to lock it completely out on the queen side. Sometimes in such positions I even play a simple move like bishop e6, rook to d8. Stockfish does not always like this, but for me this looks like just a simple solution where I'm totally in control and I don't have to think about anything, which is nice. Just bring all the pieces into play. Either way, as soon as you realize this plan, you're dominating. That's pretty much it with the London system, but I want to show you one additional idea which could be helpful sometimes. Sometimes they go something like pawn h3, and then they alter their setup a little bit. They play bishop e2, as they castle, they then castle as well, and they play pawn to c4. Now, that is not the standard London system with the pawn on c3 and the bishop on d3. And here, you could utilize the exact same plan. You could play queen e8, followed by pawn e5, and that is still a great idea for black. However, there is also an additional idea. Sometimes you can provide the extra support to this e5 square by moving your knight to e4, and here you hit two birds with one stone. You centralize your knight, putting it to this nice square where it just puts pressure all around, but on top of that you also open up this diagonal for the bishop, and therefore your bishop becomes one extra piece that supports your central advancement. Therefore, after they do whatever, you then break open the center with pawn e5, and again from here on you're taking over. You attack the bishop, you attack the pawn. As they trade, they still need to move the bishop away. After it goes, you can do different things, but usually it's nice if you can push this pawn forward. If your knight is on the way, you can trade it off and then push the pawn forward, attacking this knight. Now they also have to worry about the queen. They gotta do something. If they trade, great. Now your rook is controlling this open file, and the knight actually is in trouble, because what can they do? They can't go here because you've got both knight and bishop who control this square. Similarly, they can't go to d4 because you do control this square as well. If they go to g5, this knight is going to be captured after h6. Our bishop is taking away this square, therefore you're winning here. Ultimately, they're left with knight to e1, but of course it's very sad, and you can now go inside with the rook to d2, attacking everything along the second rank, and you're totally winning here. You can grab this pawn with the rook, with the bishop. You can play bishop e6, going after this one and the rook, and still you can grab the other pawn after that, and again, it's total domination. An extra bonus for you is that you can use the same variation against the bishop g5. Bishop g5 is a tricky move. Some of your opponents have watched opening videos, maybe even my videos, about this opening trap, that if black tries to capture this bishop, that's not a good idea, because after e3 white counters, and then it leads to this quick checkmate. Now certainly black should not go for this line, but we've got something better. Basically, you can use the same setup that we used previously against the London system. You just don't want to play knight f6 straight away, because white can possibly take it, and there's no problem there, but anyway, it just doubles your pawns and avoids you playing that system. Therefore, you can start by going g6, and then bishop to g7, and now your bishop supports the square, therefore you can safely play knight to f6. But on top of that, in all these variations, this bishop on g5 is still in danger. It's just that you don't want to try to grab it straight away, but down the line, the bishop is still in danger, and you can actually play h6, bishop h4, d6, and you're kind of tightening the situation around that bishop. So at some point you can go g5 and maybe e5, f4, stuff like that, and it actually is quite real. Let me show you what I mean. Let's say they go bishop d3, you play knight to c6. I'm delaying this knight to f6 move a little bit because, you know, at some point I want to go g5 and not let them trade off their bishop. I want to just capture it for nothing. Alright, so I'm playing all the other moves of my system. Knight c6, I'm still preparing down the line to play e5. Of course not right now, that would blunder the queen. And after c3, now I'm ready. So I've got all my other pieces in place, and I can just play g5, kicking this bishop away, and after this to play e5. And again, they're quite in trouble after that, because we're threatening e4 with a double attack to the bishop and knight. But if they try to move this bishop away, and they do that by going bishop b5 or something like that, then after the trade we can play f4, and we actually accomplished the other plan of ours, captured this bishop on g3 and refuted that bishop idea that way. Of course they could have played something different, but anyway your plan remains to be the same as we used against the London system. Now, let me show you real quick what to do against other aggressive attempts of white, because some players are really afraid of that, but in reality they're not dangerous. One of them being playing knight to c3, trying to play e4 quickly and to kind of attack you that way. Initially you play knight f6, providing an additional defense to this square, and then they go bishop g5. They're still trying to put pressure down this diagonal and maybe play e4 at some point. For example, if black lightheartedly plays pawn e6, which is wrong, white would be able to actually play e4 and take advantage of the pin. That's why you can't take right here. In fact, he's the one attacking you. And again, of course, it is still playable for black, but white is the one attacking, and we do not want that. Forewarned is forearmed. We know their plan. We know they want to play e4, and it's very easy to shut it down. You just go pawn d5. And now they can't attack your center anymore. We shut it down, this e4 idea, completely. Due to their knight on c3, which obstructs this pawn, they can't push this pawn forward and try to attack you that way. Therefore, you just have a very solid position. After that, you complete your development. I'll show you an example variation after that, but you don't have to memorize it. It's just that you need to shut down this e4 idea, and after that, you have a comfortable game. For example, if they take on f6, fine, you recapture. This also opens up this diagonal for your bishop, therefore there is no problem. After e3, we can play bishop e6, just cementing the center. Let's say queen f3. If they try to be aggressive and put pressure to these pawns, it's no problem. You can easily defend them. Quite often, black actually castles queenside. You also have got different bishop b4, knight b4 ideas. If they play a3, you just castle queenside, and again you have an excellent setup. Moreover, this avalanche of pawns on the queenside, at some point is ready to be pushed forward. Let's say if they go knight a2, trying to go here, you can even play g5, which takes away this square, but generally speaking also just allows you to potentially expand there. For example, in this game, white played knight g3, trying to be active, but it backfired because after f4, pawn takes and knight takes d4, black started to attack himself. After queen e3, black sacrificed the knight temporarily, followed by d4, and white was destroyed here. Queen d2, pawn takes, attacking these both knights, queen f4, pawn takes. Now the king is exposed, white castled, black captured here, and after rook d1, white tried to counterattack, but black finished the game with queen to d1. It turns out that we distract the bishop, and after that, our queen is reborn. Now, of course, you don't have to remember this entire variation. It's just an example line. Fundamentally, the line ends right here. After white goes knight c3, you go knight f6. After they go bishop g5, trying to push e4, you play d5, and it shuts down their attack. Another popular attempt of white is the so-called Staunton Gambit, where they give up a pawn, trying to speed up their development. Now, the main move here is knight c3, attacking this pawn. Of course, there is also something completely shady, such as queen h5 check, and as you cover, they play bishop e2, desperately hoping for you to capture that, because that will lead to the checkmate by the bishop. Of course, just don't take the queen, play knight f6, knight c6, or whatever. It's pretty simple to refute that. Now, going back, of course, a normal way for white to play would be knight to c3, developing and attacking this pawn, therefore you defend it, and then they go bishop g5. And at this point, again, it's a little bit uncomfortable, because you don't want to play e6, you would voluntarily pin your own knight, and you would allow them to grab this pawn actually, thanks to the pin, and they're attacking. Again, we don't want that. Now, pawn to d5 is a decent move to play, but still you weaken your position a little bit, you fall behind in development, and I would not recommend that. The easier approach is still to go for this kingside fianchetto that we're using a lot today, to just play pawn g6, because we need to develop this bishop somehow, and if this way is not good, we just go the other way for pawn g6 and bishop g7. And after that we castle, and we've got no problems. If they wish to get their pawn back, they probably need to take here right now, and then they're free to capture the pawn back, but they only got back their sacrificed pawn, therefore there is no advantage for white. You can play d5 to contest the center and to kick off this knight, and after that you just have a totally good and equal position. Then I can go back somewhere to c3, to g3, doesn't matter, and basically that is end of story. After that you just complete your development of minor pieces and castle. So that is how you refute this Staunton Gambit idea. Again, I can show you an example line, no need to memorize it, it's just that one of the ways for you to complete your development. You can bring your knight out, because we want to develop knights before bishops. After knight f3, one of the ways for black here is to castle queenside, because our kingside is a little bit weakened by this pawn movement. And therefore black can play queen e7, getting in tempo for this check, and forcing white to put the bishop to a less active square. Then you can play bishop d7 and castle queenside on the next move, which gives you a totally fine and safe position. Moreover, these knights are going to be objects for your attack. in the middle game, because after we start pushing these pawns, you see we're going to be gaining temples, attacking these knights. Same thing with the G pawn. If they ever play something like rook e1, that's not a problem. You can just drop your queen to f7 to safety, and after that still execute the same pawn assault on the king side, and you're having a great position. You've got 2 bishops and everything's fine. Having said that, of course, your opponents could play any other moves, including the ones I would never imagine, and therefore it's not the point to try to memorize everything. You just need to understand fundamental ideas of the opening, and after that to rely on your positional understanding to play well in any positions. If you want to level up your positional understanding, I've got a free masterclass about that. You can access it by clicking the link up there. And if you missed my first video about the Dutch defense with the main setup, then check it out right there.